Uh, my friend died, which, happens, I guess. It was hard for me to believe that Evelyn was real when she was sitting right in front of me, so nowadays it's even harder not to wonder if I made her up in the first place. But no one aside from Evelyn herself is or was weird enough to invent an Evelyn. I met her at a medieval winter solstice feast. She emerged from candlelight and marched straight towards me as if destiny had handed her my precise coordinates. She was an unlikely mix of Asian and Mexican features, bleach blonde hair, bright, unnaturally blue contacts, and wide-rimmed, vibrant red glasses. She was dressed like a glammed-up Renaissance maiden of ill repute, which was appropriate for the occasion, but her corset was so tight that her waist was no wider than my two wrists pressed together. She looked, in short, like an alien. And I knew who she was, of course, and she knew who I was. I was sort of dating her ex, who was also my ex before she came along. It went back and forth for a while, but whatever, it's not the interesting part of the story. The point is we were, let's say, aware of each other. She sat down next to me and asked, without introduction, "Why can't Jews eat pork?" She asked a lot of very strange questions, all followed by the same intense, inquisitive glare through the blue eyes that weren't hers, which I am confident must have been some sort of high-tech lenses into the soul. She drove like a psycho, and I loved her for it. There was a moment where I was absolutely certain that when I died, it would be in the shotgun seat of Evelyn's car, and I was 100% on board with this. I was a culturally confused 17-year-old immigrant, declaratively moldable, actively seeking a person to be. I might as well have had an all-caps tattoo on my forehead that read, "Teach me." And Evelyn was 24 when we met. As far as I know, she spent her whole life in the States, so I never traced down the source of her glaring otherness. But she was undeniably rocking that same tattoo in a drastically different font. So we basically, Sorry, one second. I found it. She was always trying to make sense of the world, as if she very genuinely could not, no matter how hard she tried or how intensely she investigated, bring herself to comprehend the absurdity of human logic, let alone boundaries. Logic and boundaries which she most certainly did not share. So we basically took turns misinforming each other on how to exist. And it's been a decade, so forgive me if memory fails to chronologically sequence our escalating spiral of misadventures. But at some point, very early on in the Evelyn saga, we accidentally discovered that De Anza Community College has its own cute little mini art museum. We met that day to establish a truce because we'd been clashing over the X thing. This was a short time after Evelyn showed up in the middle of the night and threatened me with a knife, but again, totally not the interesting part of the story. I'd say that roaming through an empty community college art museum is an unlikely way for anyone to spend an afternoon, but unless you're willing to foolishly forfeit a rare slice of oddity, if Evelyn wanders in someplace, you follow. It's just how it goes. The guard at the front woke up for just long enough to nod us in and tap the clicker twice. The second we crossed the threshold, Evelyn assumed the form of a hurricane. She touched everything. All of it. I felt that even the guard wasn't entirely safe, and not just with her hands. She brushed fabrics against her cheek, pulled back frames to see what hid behind them. Innocently, without a shred of rebellion, she explored the art with all 5 of her senses. Even the really unlikely one. At some point, she grabbed a frame and went, in awe, I watched her spin around the gallery like she was made of wind until she disappeared into one of those tiny, dark gallery rooms. And I hesitated. It felt like approaching a resting butterfly or checking to see if a rat had finally succumbed to the bait. Evelyn, of course, was the rare kind of butterfly rat that couldn't care less whether you were there or not. But I had yet to learn this. Regardless, I entered after her. Evelyn was standing over a large barrel of oil, her face illuminated by a red light from below. She was looking down at the tarry liquid her dark silhouette reflected back at her. Bearing witness to her for a moment, I forgot I existed until she lifted her eyes to meet mine. "How deep do you think it goes?" she asked. And I shrugged. She lifted a single finger and dunked it into the barrel. It collided into the metallic bottom with a low-pitched thunk. When she retrieved her finger, the oil had marked it barely to the second joint. "Huh," she said. "They lied to us." And having concluded her fruitful pursuit of truth, she wiped her dripping finger on her thigh and exited. And I'm about 65% sure that that is exactly how it all happened. And I know how this goes. It's not my first loss. I know that people fade in memory no matter how close or how loved. Characters who were whole ones with infinite complexity and potential become blurs, and moments become cryptic snapshots at best. And to be honest, that does scare me. It scares me a lot. So I'd really like for this to be the memory that stays. And I'd like to leave it at that. A carefully curated history where I omit the part about how I eventually shut Evelyn out. Okay. The thing is, this ex, he's not the interesting part of this story, but he's mildly relevant. He's the type of ex who was much older and twisted my reality in a way that was a welcome experiment at first, but very quickly became, as you might imagine, a tar pit in which I was trapped and sinking. And it's never so simple as leaving. There's a whole process of bending the narrative in your favor that has to happen first. So I crafted a perfectly polished story to cling to in which I, the young heroine, skillfully evaded the clutches of the evil man-child and gleefully skipped away with every ounce of my dignity, innocence, and self-esteem intact. Foolproof. There was only one problem. Evelyn. Evelyn was there the whole time. Evelyn was a witness, and if called to the metaphorical stand, she would tell the jury obliviously, innocently, in the same way she never seemed to fully understand repercussions, how I believed every lie. And she would testify that I was the idiot mammoth who saw the tar pit and walked straight in anyway. She might go so far as to say that I was saved only by my willingness to leave a friend behind. She was still caught up in the tar pit when I left. I never turned back to pull her out. And even when she did eventually leave this guy, something in my heart still rebelled against her. She would text from time to time throughout the years, and I was very careful to promptly let conversations die, like a coward. Her texts alone threatened my narrative of self like the menacing echo of a previous draft. She sent a message this past July, years after we last spoke. As she was known to do, she asked a very strange question, innocently, warmly, and I did not answer. In January, out of the blue, the same ex commented something spiteful and petty on my Instagram, and I found myself alone in my rage and humiliation, along with a desperate need for my narrative to be validated. And suddenly, my only witness, my one problem, potentially became my one solution. Evelyn. I pulled up her Facebook only to find it covered in obituaries. She texted me in July. She died in August. I don't know how. And by the time she was actually gone, I'd already given memory a very generous head start to fade. And it feels almost ghoulish to dig up her memory just to find the truth that I accidentally buried with her. But without a witness, all I can do is scramble to salvage what's left. I don't remember what the strange questions were, just that she asked them. I remember that half the time she scared the living shit out of me, and the other half I idolized her obliviousness to the rules. But I don't remember me. And if we didn't take a selfie that day at the museum, I might not have even believed that I was there. If I got to choose, I'd want to remember Evelyn as the one who taught me that the world was meant to be touched and that we don't need permission. Thank you.
This is the only show I've ever been to where I just want to long hug everybody. I probably should have drank later. Ronnie is a writer and future nurse. You can find her on Instagram at sincerely_r_Cohen.